we present Toby Stephens reading Francis Durbridge's Paul Temple Intervenes.
Chapter 1. On the Air. Paul Temple never failed to extract the utmost enjoyment from a trip to America. The inconceivable vastness of the continent, with its astonishing gamut of civilizations, appealed to his sensitive imagination. He was forever planning a novel, of some considerable length, dealing with the adventures of an Englishman in search of the hidden powers behind American life. So far, it was just an idea, just recognizable in the half-dozen random jottings in the notebook he invariably carried. And at the moment there did not seem to be much possibility of its materialization into any substantial form, for Paul Temple was very busy indeed on his present trip to the United States. It had started with an abrupt summons from Colonel Randall at the Ministry of Information. The Colonel had informed Temple that a few selected lecturers were being sent to the States in an effort to render that nation rather more Britain-conscious. It was essential that these lecturers should be known to the American public, and the MOI had apparently been to some trouble to discover that the sale of Paul Temple's novels in the States had long since passed 6 figures. Furthermore, a batch of newspaper cuttings had convinced them that the novelist detective was also a man of action, who could be relied upon to use his initiative in any unorthodox situation. So Paul Temple went to America. This time he took his wife with him, and when the lecture agency who made Temple's arrangements discovered that Steve was also an author of the Front Page Men, which had enjoyed enormous popularity in the States, following the sensational reports of the activities of this gang of criminals in England, then Steve's services were also very much in demand, and she was booked for a long series of lectures to women's organizations of every description. So strange indeed were some of them that Steve felt that the association in question should be lecturing her on its peculiar origin. However, Paul Temple and Steve ultimately arrived at Chicago. They marveled at its luxury hotels, eyed its stockyards somewhat dubiously, walked the full length of the celebrated waterfront, and finally reached the luxurious portals of Station GSKZ, where Paul Temple was due to be interviewed on the air that evening by Cranmer Guest, whose reputation as radio's ace interviewer conjured $1,000 from the pockets of his sponsors every time his program went on the air. This was the first time Temple had visited an American broadcasting station, though he had been on air several times from the stately building that dominates Langham Place. Station GSKZ was a very different proposition, however, from the somewhat austere atmosphere of Broadcasting House. It wanted 5 minutes to 7 o'clock, and Paul Temple and Steve found themselves enveloped in a crowd which was surging through the foyer of the studios. It reminded the novelist of fighting for admission to a Hollywood premiere. There was apparently a theatre on the ground floor level, and a large notice near the door informed the visitors that the Laughing Cavalier program was to be broadcast from this particular auditorium at 7 o'clock. Temple and Steve had some difficulty in avoiding being swept in with the mass of people who were presenting yellow tickets to the page boy at the door. However, they eventually extricated themselves and headed for a desk in an opposite corner of the foyer, which was marked Information. The blonde in charge could best be described as snappy, in the more pleasant sense of the word. "Laughing Cavalier program in the auditorium," she announced mechanically, before Temple could make any inquiry. Temple smiled. "I'm sure the Laughing Cavalier is quite—"
Sample complete. Ready to continue?